I'm really delighted to introduce the award-winning Paul Cortese Distinguished Professor of Management, Dr. Jennifer Chatman, who joins us for tonight's program, Leading High Performance Culture. And while I'm at it, I should point out that Paul Cortese is actually in the room. He's sitting right behind Jennifer, so round of applause. And Professor Chatman's going to discuss insights on how to inspire your organizations and how to accelerate strategic success by cultivating a distinctive culture. She's going to offer practical techniques that you can apply in your workplace, and you'll have the chance to ask her some questions at the end of her remarks. Professor Chatman is a leading researcher in the area of organizational culture and leadership. Her research and her consulting have made her a leading expert with clients across top Fortune 500 companies and global firms. She currently leads the Leading High Performance Cultures Executive Program at Berkeley Executive Education. Actually, we have the CEO of Berkeley Executive Education, Mike Riley. Mike, right back there, there's Mike in the room. Jennifer served for 10 years as the faculty director of UC Berkeley's flagship program for senior executives, the Berkeley Executive Leadership Program. She also served as the faculty director of our executive education and our PhD program, and she was the chair of the Management of Organizations group at the Haas School. So please join me in welcoming Professor Chatman to the stage.
So thank you so much for coming and spending an evening with us. It's just a delight to reconnect and see how you're doing. Anne said a few things about what I'm going to talk about, and actually I'm not really going to talk about any of that. I'm not going to give you any advice and any tips. I can do that, not tonight, but I'm going to do three kind of other things. One of them is I'm going to give you an update on the Haas Defining Leadership Principles. Rich Lyons and I have just finished another case on that, so I'm going to bring you up to date on that. The second thing, which is sort of the opposite of the advice for what to do to develop your culture, is I'm going to talk about 4 perils of narcissistic leaders. It's kind of my snarky research, but it's super interesting, and I just wanted to share it with you. And then the third thing I'm going to talk about, if we have time, is what we can learn about high-performing teams from Himalayan expeditions. And I know that sounds like a disconnect, but there ends up being a lot of really important insight. We just finished a paper there. Let me just start by saying that Paul Cortese means the world to me and has made pretty much all of my research possible. Paul has a BS from 1948. If we could just help me in thanking Paul for just making this possible. Thank you. Thanks, Paul. Now, he didn't approve anything I'm going to say tonight, so, so we'll just go from there. So let me tell you where we are on the Defining Leader Principles, because before Dean Lyons left, he and I had a lunch. I don't know, it was probably late in 2017. And over lunch, we started talking about the transition that was coming up. We hadn't yet launched the dean search, but we kind of knew it was coming, and we kind of left feeling like a lot had really been done in terms of the defining principles, sort of across our different activities in admissions, Applicants now have to write about a defining principle in their application and what it means to them and how their path has sort of connected them to one of the defining principles. At student orientation, we help students understand right away what the 4 defining leader principles mean to the school. We have awards in the name of the defining leader principles. We have a set of alumni themes that relate to our defining leader principles. Our faculty were looking for ways to incorporate the defining leader principles into their courses and coursework. And staff were really thinking about how to leverage the defining principles to do everything that we do even better. But you know, if there's an A case, there's going to be a B case, right? So we left the A case with the following 2 questions. First, how likely was it going to be that the defining leader principles would outlive a single leader who championed them? And second, how could we think about the defining leader principles in a way that continued to drive success for the school? Because they're going to evolve and change. And so we wrote the B case, which is just about to come out. We're going to be happy to share it with anyone who's interested in looking. And this actually caused us, in the year before Anne arrived, to sort of take some steps to deepen our commitment to the defining leader principles. The first thing we did, obviously, was we carved them in stone, literally, right? The defining leader principles, if you haven't been by campus lately, you should come by, and it is not lost on us that most admissions tours for the entire university start right there in our courtyard, and people are able to see the defining leader principles etched in stone up on our building. Okay, so that's a commitment that we've now made, right? We'll have to do something pretty substantial to undo that. Our beloved advisory board wrote a letter of support where they said, we as Haas board members wanted to express our strong support for our school's 4 defining leader principles. You all know them, so I won't repeat them. In our judgment, these principles and the culture they shape are important to the Haas school's future and a source of competitive advantage for the school. Right? That was a major message coming through from some of our most important supporters in the school. We changed our course evaluations. We added a question that says, this instructor represents well our school's defining principles. So our faculty are now evaluated in terms of their ability to connect to the defining leader principles. And we deputized a set of culture champions within the school. And many of us have our proud culture champion pins, and we are in charge of absolutely nothing, but we are very energetic, and we look for ways to embed the culture within the school even further. So how's it going? We have a couple of data points that show first that our external brand is known and distinct. Poets and Quants, which is kind of the rag for business schools, said recently, Haas is the archetype for a values-driven MBA program. It's a differentiator for us. They said there's no doubt that Haas stands alone among business schools in consciously defining and shaping a strong culture to its competitive advantage. The school's defining leadership principles are deeply embedded in the school and in the mindset of many of its stakeholders. Our applications are up. We are winning more of the students that we want to attract to the school. And in fact, one of our favorite charts is the following, and you can't see it closely, but all you need to see is this big, long blue line that says that most of the students who decide to come to Haas come because of the defining leader principles. So it is a differentiator in that sense. We further improved placement because recruiters know who we're producing and find our package of students and their profiles very, very appealing. 8 of the 10 largest gifts in the school's history were given in the name of the defining leader principles, and they helped us build beautiful new Chu Hall, which we love. The fit of our students have increased. We don't have a survey on this, but apparently the number of a-holes is down. I don't know. I never thought it was very high, but okay. We've integrated the Defining Leader Principles into at least 180 of our business processes. We get incredible notes and emails and comments from people in our community telling us how much the Defining Leader Principles mean to them. Someone named their company CWA Incorporated. Someone said that he's raising his children according to the Defining Leader Principles. These are deep. And we recruited a world-class dean who's taking us to the next level. So it's all a great story. So things are going well. Okay. Let me turn to less well. Okay, so we've been doing this research on how leaders affect an organization's culture. And let me just ask you, when I say narcissistic leader, does anyone sort of have a sense that they've had one in their career? Right? Yeah, okay. So let me tell you a little bit about what our research is showing in terms of some of the perils of this leadership orientation. And I'm not sure I'm at the point where I have advice, but my goal at this point is to raise awareness, because the bottom line is that the impact of narcissistic leaders is not great, and it is lasting. So somehow we need to come to grips with that. Okay, so ground zero. Here's the initial piece of this, which is we have a hard time distinguishing great leaders from narcissistic leaders. There are overlapping attributes in our minds, and those are very blurred. And when you look at the traits associated with narcissism, it actually becomes pretty clear what's happening here. So there are a set of attributes that we're really attracted to. Things like, grandiose vision and charisma and having a charming interpersonal style and being self-confident. We love people who are confident. Self-promoting, so they get information out there about their accomplishments. They convey the image of a prototypically effective leader. They have a strong sense of their own self-efficacy. These are all appealing features to us. But on the other side, also part of that package for narcissists is a sense of personal superiority, dominance, and a desire for power. And often that power is personal power rather than socialized power. Lacking empathy, a willingness to exploit others to achieve certain goals. The possibility of devaluing people, right? So there are these blurred lines, and I keep getting calls from the press about Elon Musk, and people want me to sort of clinically assess Elon Musk. I mean, I don't know, what, right? But inevitably, the last question that the journalist will ask is, well, don't effective leaders who are really trying to do something bold and something unique and something that's never been done before, don't they have to be a little bit narcissistic? So that's really the question that we went into this research with, okay? And let me give you the preview. The answer is no, okay? The answer is no. Okay, this is just a quote from our narcissist in chief. I love this one. I think I'm actually humble. I think I'm much more humble than you would understand. It's like my favorite. It's an actual quote. It's really great, right? You hit it all at once, right? I'm self-aggrandizing, I'm putting you down, right? It's the whole thing right there. Okay. It's a real quote. Peril number one, and each of these actually, there are 4 research papers associated with this. 2 of them are published, one's under review, and one we're still collecting data on. So these are real, actually. So it turns out that narcissistic leaders end up compensating themselves significantly more over time than their top executive teams. And the question is why? Well, they end up, and here's what it looks like. So, right, students always, I'm not going to spare you the data. I'm going to give you the data here. So these are, in blue, the CEOs who were rated by others as lower on narcissism. This is when they're new, when they're first hired. And this is over time, essentially what happens. The red line is the narcissistic leaders, and the y-axis here is the gap between the CEO's pay and the rest of the top management team, right? You can get these data from 10K reports, right? So these are the NEOs, essentially, in the firms. And what we see is for leaders, that basically everybody starts in the same place, but that over time, less narcissistic leaders narrow the gap between their own compensation and their top team, while more narcissistic leaders widen that gap. Okay? So this suggests that narcissistic leaders are claiming more credit for the outcomes within an organization, right? And this is real money here. A 1 standard deviation increase in narcissism in our sample, which was high technology firms, was worth about $5.1 million in compensation, right? So this is real money, right? Shareholders should be sort of watching this, okay. The second peril is that narcissistic leaders tend to embroil their companies in more lawsuits. So the first study we did on this was just a correlational study where we tracked, again, through SEC data, 10K data, we tracked CEO narcissism as rated by their employees, and the number of lawsuits that they were involved in and how long those lawsuits lasted, because firms have to report lawsuits over a certain dollar amount in their annual reports. And there was a positive correlation. So we went back to the lab and we tried to figure out why that was the case. And we suspected that it had to do with narcissistic leaders being overconfident. But what we also found was that they were insensitive to risk in a kind of weird way. So we set up a study where there was where subjects, randomly assigned subjects, who were either high or low on narcissism, were assigned to a condition where they read a scenario that basically said there's a 20% chance that if you launch this product, you're going to be sued for patent infringement. And then there was another condition where we said there's an 80% chance that if you launch this product, you're going to be sued for patent infringement. And what we found was that there was no difference between high and low narcissism in the 20% risk, right? At low levels of risk, people are kind of on the same page. However, when you get over to 80%, those who were low on narcissism didn't launch the product. Those who were high on narcissism launched it at almost the same rate. So to them, 80% risk looked the same as 20% risk, right? That's bad. That's like a cognitive bias that you can't actually see and process the risk in front of you. So this seemed important. The third peril, and this is the one that I'm actually the most worried about. Narcissistic leaders create enduring cultures that are significantly lower in 2 dimensions of culture that are very, very important. One is collaboration, and the other is integrity. So again, we went out and did a correlational study measuring leader narcissism, measuring the culture of the firms, right? And then we came back to the lab and actually did some more out in the field, and we basically found 4 things. First, that narcissistic leaders were less likely to endorse policies that created cultures high in integrity and collaboration. They were more willing to hire, promote, and reward people who were ethically questionable, right? Who actually lied and cheated, right? They were willing to support those folks. They were less likely to sanction violations of integrity and collaboration. And then what we found is that over time, even after the narcissistic leader left, those cultures that were embedded of low collaboration and low integrity had a lag, right? There was a kind of embeddedness of the culture that outlasted the leader. So this, to me, ends up being very, very concerning. What we know about organizations, I know it's not as funny as it should be, right? It's bad, right? This is what's sort of been keeping me up at night. But you know, what we know about organizations is if you ask the basic question about an organization, why organize? The very simple, straightforward answer to that question is we organize because we try to do things collectively together that no one of us could accomplish alone. Given that, the idea that you're not going to collaborate within an organization becomes very, very problematic. Okay? Peril number 4, finally, is that we find that narcissistic leaders trade off expertise for loyalty. And we're doing this study of top executive teams and how long they stay together and what their functional expertise is. And so we find that narcissistic leaders are much less likely to take in expert advice. They expect loyalty from others, but even are slightly unwilling to reciprocate back. They are not dependable partners, essentially. And they are significantly more susceptible to ingratiation, meaning that their evaluation of you depends on how much you suck up to them, right? And all of this is problematic because what it means is that the good information that leaders need to make solid decisions is actually not coming through to them, right? So the final thing that we found here, and I think perhaps this is the lightest of the findings that we had. Sorry, sort of a buzzkill. But to me, the most significant finding of all that we found, and it was a test of what we call convergent validity, which is something where you're trying to make sure that you're actually capturing the construct that you're interested in. The highest statistical correlation was between narcissism and signature size. So the correlation is 0.50. We analyzed 10K reports and other opportunities for signatures. We also found a positive correlation between we did a text analysis of how many times CEOs in 10K reports used the pronoun me versus we, and that's positively correlated. Narcissists use me significantly more often than they use we. Okay. So as I said, I'm not quite sure what to advise at this point, but I will say sort of two things. One is that narcissists present us with a puzzle. On the one hand, many of the characteristics that make them problematic, being self-confident, having grandiose visions, being exploitive, being persistent, can, under the right circumstance, also make them and or the organizations they lead quite successful. And this is why we kind of blur these concepts of narcissism and leadership. In fact, when they're correct, right, they are hailed as our best possible leaders. But when these same characteristics cause them to fail, they can destroy entire companies. We know that to be true and leave this sort of lasting problematic culture. So just a couple of things to start thinking about. One is to be aware of this issue. A second is when thinking about whom to hire as a leader in your organization, on your team, or if you're contemplating a move and thinking about who your next boss could be, try to get information on how they've treated people in the past. That's probably the most direct source of information. Have they shared the spotlight? Have they been a good mentor? Have they promoted other people, even when it doesn't benefit them personally? That's probably the single most important quality that you would want to look for. But also recognize that being an ambitious visionary doesn't require being a narcissist. And in fact, narcissists are less likely to recognize the awesomeness of the collective and how the collective, when combined together in effective ways, can make incredible things happen. You also probably want to look at their risk profile, given that we know they have this kind of blind spot. So that's as far as I've gotten. If you can think of any other ideas for what we might do, I am absolutely all ears. Okay, so final thing, let's talk Himalayas. Has anyone climbed in the Himalayas? Okay, great. 2, 3, 4. Wow, I know it's an ambitious group. Okay, so this is sort of a crazy thing. One of my fantastic PhD students, Elliot Sherman, who's now a professor at the London Business School, came to me one day with this data set. It turns out that all Himalayan expeditions have been cataloged since the year 1950, since the modern era of high altitude climbing has commenced, where they started using oxygen on occasion and so forth. And this enabled an opportunity to look at a sample which is rare. It's a very international sample with no essential home base, which ends up, from a research perspective, being very, very useful. There are 50,000 people in the sample. There are 8,000 expeditions, of which we looked at 5,000 for a variety of reasons. We culled it down a bit. And this, in my mind, allowed us to ask some questions, which is one of my themes of my research, about the intersection between a team's culture and a team's composition, that is, its demographic diversity. And this ends up being a very important intersection in most teams and in most organizations. So we were interested in the question, what can we learn about what I'm calling optimal collaboration from diverse teams climbing in Himalayan mountains? So the first thing that we learned in this incredible sample was fairly straightforward. We learned that when team diversity was based on an attribute that was not related to the task of mountain climbing, right? And this was nationality in this case. It doesn't matter what nationality you come from. That doesn't predispose you to be a better or worse climber. It's irrelevant, right? Just like in most cases, sex and race and some other attributes, eye color, doesn't really matter for the work that you're doing. When those teams that were diverse in terms of national culture embraced what we called a collectivistic culture, which was highly collaborative, they were more likely to summit. Okay? So this is a solid outcome that we can find. So these are what we call low collectivism groups. There was no difference whether they were not diverse or very diverse. It didn't really matter how collective they were. But when highly diverse cultures embrace collectivism, they were the most likely of all 4 possibilities to summit their chosen mountain. That's awesome, because what that means is collectivism helps to avoid these kind of biases that are unrelated to task effectiveness. Okay? However, when we looked at a different kind of expertise, a different kind of diversity, which is task expertise. We knew how many times people had attempted climbs in the Himalayan region, and there was a range from 0 to 15, right? People in the sample had gone there 15 times. What we found was being more collectivistic led to a greater chance of climber death. Oh my God, like this is real. This is a real outcome. This isn't like our silly little subjects in Psych 1. This is a real consequential outcome. So why is that? What was going on here? So we found this relationship, and we went back to the lab, and this is sort of how I work, is I do some in the field, and I go do some in the lab to try to find the causal mechanisms. And what we found, you don't have to bother with that, that's just to impress you. This is called a mediating effect. What we found is that collectivism as a cultural orientation within a team or an organization has a collateral effect of blurring demographic diversity. Blurring demographic diversity. The more collectivistic we are, the more we share superordinate goals, the less we see differences among us. That's good when the demographic diversity is not helpful, disruptive, irrelevant to the task. However, it's bad when maintaining distinctions among people, like who has the most expertise on this task, is valuable. You see that? It's subtle, right? It's subtle, but what it says is sometimes when we hear a way of addressing diversity is by being very, very collectivistic, what I worry about is that we're going to throw the baby out with the bathwater, and we're going to lose the distinctive expertise that is actually useful for tasks. So what this means is that we need to look at how to maintain a balance between group cohesion and valuable sources of diversity. And this is a harder job for managers, to actually figure out how to simultaneously maintain our cohesion and what brings us together, but also to think about the distinctive things that each person brings to the task. So let me see how I can sum this up. So here's a quote. Visionary leaders succeed because they are narcissists who devote their talent with unrelenting focus to achieving their dreams, even if it's sometimes at the expense of those around them. No, wrong, right? No, it's not true. Visionary leaders are not necessarily narcissistic. I reject that hypothesis, okay? Narcissism is a particularly potent leader attribute. We have a hard time distinguishing leader effectiveness from narcissistic leaders. The distinction is super important because narcissistic leaders have a lasting impact on organizations. And taken together, what we learned from Haas, from narcissistic leaders, from Himalayan climate expeditions, is that culture is super important. You've got to get it right. The culture a group or organization adopts affects such broad-reaching behaviors as being confident without attitude, right? Being ethical, hiring people who are selfish or who are cooperative, and summiting a Himalayan mountain or dying trying. So for those of you who have culture on your mind, you're absolutely right. Keep going. And next time I see you, I'll give you the positive tips. But this time, it's a few warnings and a validation that culture is super important. Thanks so much.